some of our listeners have challenged us to not invite those with different views and values and perspectives. I think that is quite close-minded and short-sighted. I think we owe it to ourselves to debate a lot of issues on a lot of different fronts with a lot of different sorts of people who have a variety of opinion. And we've got someone with us this morning who is very different than the usual suspect who appears on Wake Up Carolina, Ivo Dawnay. Did I mispronounce? Ivo Dawnay. Did I pronounce the? That's I was also consumed by the last name. That I mispronounced the first name. Ivo Dawnay is a freelance journalist.
I am,
and you're here covering the South Carolina primary and the American presidential Democrat primary.
That's right.
Okay.
And anything else that's going.
Okay. Anything else that's going on. But there is a bit of unusuality about you being a freelance journalist. You are married to the sister of Great Britain Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
That's right. That's right.
And you are an ardent Remainer as it relates to the Brexit vote.
As is the sister.
Well,
really? As is the other two brothers.
That makes for fun picnics, I'm sure, at the family gatherings. But if you don't mind, we'll start there. As someone from across the pond, why a Remainer? Why were you so ardently in support of remaining as part of the European Union?
Well, I think there was two arguments going on during that whole referendum debate, and they were at complete cross purposes. The Remainers kept saying, look at the economy. This is crazy. If we leave the European Union, we're leaving a market of 450 million people. We've become quite a strong economy as a result of being inside that market. Who in hell would ever want to leave a massive marketplace? We also claimed, us Remainers, and some may dispute this, that actually Britain was made a more significant country by being one of the main players within that forum, if you like. The Leavers took a completely emotional approach to the issue, which was they didn't want anybody from outside the country telling Britain what to do in any field, whether that be to do with animal hygiene or how you trade with other countries. And they thought we must repatriate all our powers back to the UK. So the two, for almost traditional reasons, we believe in a sovereign country without inhibitions. For me, that argument didn't stand much water. Why are we in NATO if we don't want to trade our sovereignty? Why are we in the United Nations? Why are we in the World Trade Organization? The future seems to be the future of big power blocks, China, America, and maybe India and Europe. In my view, was better off standing together as a kind of alternative version of Western liberal capitalism than just having America as the sole, if you like, a purveyor of that philosophy. I thought it was good for America. I thought it was good for the UK. I thought it was good for Europe and good for the world that we were in that bloc. But we lost, and we've got to take it and try and make something of our new situation.
Ivo, if we take arguing for or against of Brexit out of the equation and just take the realities of what happened and then the Trump election, what do you sense are some similarities? Because I've argued for a good period of time that it was a very emotional election. It was not about ideology or perspectives or, the government's going to reform Medicare or Medicaid. You talked about the emotions of Brexit. Is that the similarity in what happened in your country and the Americans voting for somebody like Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think there are huge parallels. I mean, we make a mistake if we say they're exactly the same, but there are great parallels. The whole Make America Great Again is a philosophy of actually saying we're no longer ready to be world policemen. We're no longer ready to compromise American power in order to, if you like, try and create a Pax Americana around the world. We're now going to do things for ourselves. And that'll be our priority. My view is that's bad news for the rest of the world anyway. The question is whether it's bad news for America. In some respects, I would say things like withdrawing from the Middle East is actually a very good decision for America. I would say the taking on China on the somewhat outrageous trade practices that China's had, particularly in areas like stealing intellectual property, insisting on technology transfer. I think Donald Trump is right on those issues. But what I think is essentially, if you like, a time-limited benefit of Trumpism is that in the end, you can't restore the 1960s. If you're a capitalist, you believe in free markets and you believe in free, Ricardo's principle of comparative advantage. So America doesn't need to, in my view, reestablish a massive motor industry because you're beyond that now. You're in the digital age. What you're establishing is a whole new business environment, which is about data. And repatriating your car plants is actually, for me, trying to reestablish an America that existed in Eisenhower's day. Why bother? Spread the wealth around the world. You'll build markets for America to send and sell much more sophisticated products into the global economy. 3 million people, I think 3 billion people since the year 2000 have come out of dollar-a-day poverty. Those are new markets for American companies. And it seems to me those are the people you should be concentrating on. If you had remained completely protectionist, those people would still be living on under $1 a day, and they wouldn't be able to buy your goods.
But it sounds to me like you do agree, and I made the point a couple of years ago when Trump made his announcement, and I told my sidekick here, who doesn't keep up with politics like I do and hasn't run for office as I did, when I ran in South Carolina, I sensed a level of animus with the establishment, with the elites, with the managerial. I mean, whatever, the proper class, the ruling class. A lot of people have a lot of different definitions for that. But I broke it down to two issues, and I'd love to get your take on this as it relates to the global economy, and that was immigration and trade. I felt that some candidate somewhere in some country would resonate or find a message that resonated with the constituency that felt trade and immigration were leaving them behind, and it would be the working class in some of the countries around the world. Would you agree that that is the similar thread that we've seen in these populist uprisings all over the world?
Yeah, I think you're completely right. And I think that there's no question the thing that Trump has pointed out and others have pointed out in the Leave campaign in the British referendum was a sense of this, the Rust Belt and the ordinary worker being left behind by globalization, which was the fruits of which were being enjoyed only by the elite who lived in London and New York and in the suburbs of these wealthy cities. And I think there's some truth in that. I mean, I think it's quite obvious that Johnson, who won his election very much by persuading, if you like, the Rust Belts, the old industrial economies of northern England, that they should vote Conservative, not Labour, this last election. That's how he won. Now his problem is he's got to actually do something for those people. And I think it is tricky. It's not easy, actually, to kind of, if you like, put the toothpaste back in the tube. We, on the immigration front, when economies are down, everybody hates the immigrant. It's a very common phenomenon in all societies, I think. I think people are alarmed by how fast our societies are changing. That's natural. That's natural conservatism coming out. But in England, for example, already, we're very concerned now. Who is going to pick our vegetables this summer? Who is going to look after our old people? Who are going to serve in our restaurants? The British are very lazy, and they don't like doing those jobs. They're not very well paid, and they're rather hard work. And the dream of every Brit who wants to work is to work in some cushy white-collar job and pull in a salary and not sweat his brow too much. The rest of them are on welfare. One of the least educated sectors in the British economy, which is now a very brown economy mixed with all sorts of races and all sorts of people from all over the world. More international, I would argue, than even New York. But Britain now, the lowest educational attainment is by the white old native white community, and I think it shows something about attitudes. Actually,
there's a debate. We have an esteemed college professor join us on Friday. We have a couple come on Tuesday, and they argue that they believe that we're in a brush fire. It's a blip on the radar. Trumpism, Brexit, normalcy will be restored. We'll get back to some regular way of organizing our politics around the world. We're far more interested in America. than we are, what happens as we interrelate ourselves with the world. But I'm of the opinion that we're at base camp 1, that we're climbing Mount Everest and we've only begun. I think Bernie Sanders is another episode of this, and we'll talk about that in just a couple of seconds. But I want to ask your opinion of something, a theory I have, and that is when Trump gets elected, instead of the elites, the managerial class, those with so much at risk and have been in charge of kind of, managing the government's affairs, instead of having a moment of self-evaluation, of introspection, and honestly, candidly addressing why did the public believe it made sense to vote for that guy? Because I come from a little small country town. I was taught to not admire people like Donald Trump at all. And then people like me all over this country casted a ballot for a guy because they were just fed up with what was going on, and it was a bit of a protest and a kind of a Molotov cocktail under it. You've heard all the analogies. But the one thing I failed to understand is why those in control did not have a moment of introspection and self-evaluation and honestly look themselves in the mirror and say, what have we done to the American people to suggest that is even a remotely good choice, Donald Trump for president of the United States? Instead, there was this all-out resistance and just a grave pushback against Donald Trump's presidency.
Well, I think there are a lot of things going on there. One thing Trump and Johnson have in common is they're both TV personalities. Johnson became popular and interesting in the UK because he appeared on a satirical news TV show, and he was very well received by the public. It was a show watched by a great many people. Trump, of course, did The Apprentice and all that stuff. I don't think Trump is the champion of the common man, although that's how he sells himself. I don't think he's doing things which, Wall Street seem to be very comfortable with him. I think the elites have not been discomforted. Indeed, they have been given huge tax cuts by him. And although the man in the street, the ordinary worker, has seen their incomes rise for the first time in a long time since the financial crisis of 2008, their relative gain has been nothing compared to the gain of the super rich. So the idea that Trump actually is this kind of, Robin Hood figure who is taking from the rich and giving to the poor is nonsense. That's why Bernie's doing so well, because that's what he says he'll do. But I think there's a rawness about Trump. There's a kind of plain speaking sort of style about him, which I think appeals to Americans. It feels a bit sort of frontier, although of course his frontier is Queens. But it feels sort of frontier speak, and I think people like it. They think he's the ordinary man and he's talking for me. I rather suspect he's talking for himself.
But you would agree, I think, that the major driver of Trumpism, if there's such a thing, is emotions.
Yeah.
It is the belief that the average Joe is getting a shot back at the establishment, the elites, the people that have run the universe. But when you dig into the weeds, and I do a lot of reading on this, it's not just raw, unfettered populism. There are some analytics that show clearly income inequality and wage stagnation and immigrants coming to the country and unskilled labor. When you really dig into it a little bit, Trump is probably not as studied as he should be. I've often joked around, I think I understand Trumpism better than Trump does because I've read about it. And I tried to understand what generated the political spirit that led him to the White House. But you would agree that it's not only emotion that got Trump to the White House. There are some analytics that suggest that the economy has some significant fundamental fallacies and flaws.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think he's tapped into that very cleverly. I think that's what he keeps telling everybody. The question is he actually addressing those issues?
Can they be addressed? I hate to interrupt you, but can those be addressed? And if so, what sorts of policies lead to, I don't want to say closing the income inequality gap, but some of these things that we talk about?
Well, I really think that both Johnson and Trump have identified the issue. And the issue is that those income inequalities. I'm just not sure whether either of them have identified the solution. I think it's incredibly hard in a liberal market economy to say how. Are we just going to put huge wealth taxes on very wealthy people? And what would the consequence of that be? Would they just simply leave the country? Or would they change? The wealthy people are very deracinated. If it's better for them for tax reasons to live in Monte Carlo, not Beverly Hills, they'll move to Monte Carlo. One thing rich people have in common is a desire to hold on to their money. And they are less, if you like, patriotic, I think, than many other people who have less money. So I think this is a really big problem, and I'm not sure what the solution is, but I think you're absolutely right. It is an effort in both countries of ordinary people to say we're fed up with the system as it works at the moment. And I think it's really difficult for Johnson and for Trump actually to find the solution, and for Sanders and Warren and that lot. They think they've got the solutions, but the solutions are very complex and might involve a huge amount of government engineering. And what one knows about America is its resistance to government engineering.
No question about it. Can you hang around another couple of moments? We'll take a break, a timely break. We'll be back in just a couple of seconds. Wake Up Caroline on a Monday morning. Interesting guest, Ivo Dawnay is with us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Again, welcome to you. I enjoy the accent, enjoy the conversation.
I'm enjoying yours.
I was going to say, this is trying to keep up with this is kind of tough.
If you can listen to him speak, and we didn't grow up in the same neighborhood. I'll assure you of that. Let's shift gears and go to the 2020 presidential primary on the Democrat side. The person who will eventually compete against Donald Trump for the American presidency. We were told that it was inevitable that Joe Biden would be the nominee. He's a centrist. He can beat Trump in the Rust Belt. We were told in 2016 that Jeb Bush or John Kasich would be the model to defeat Hillary Clinton. We're kind of off in the land of unknowns, the unelectability of a candidate, ball it up, throw it in the trash. I don't think it even exists any longer. How do you see, as we speak, what happened Saturday in Nevada, and kind of where do we go from here? Because you're here covering the presidential primary in South Carolina, which is this coming Saturday.
That's right. Well, I went to Iowa and I went to New Hampshire, and I've seen all the main Democrat candidates except for Amy Klobuchar. So I saw Joe Biden. He looked very charming, very old, and very sleepy, I thought. So I fear for Biden. I fear that he really doesn't want it enough. I was very impressed by his wife, who spoke very well for him, but when he was at his rally, his message was basically, vote for me, you know me, I'm a nice guy, the guy in the White House isn't a nice guy. That seemed to be the message. And it seemed to be continuity Obama. You'll get what you got with Obama, which I think had its shortcomings. Warren, obviously very clever, school mommy, bit bossy, full of passion, but maybe just the Coke Light to Bernie. Bernie, well, he does feel a bit crazy, I think. He obviously creates a huge amount of noise around him. He is obviously very enthusiastically received by the young people. But it all seems a bit like our Jeremy Corbyn. Everybody will have prizes. You want something, we'll give it to you. Free university education, free healthcare, free everything. And I'm astonished he's doing as well as he is. I cannot believe that he could get the nomination, but people tell me he really could, that he's now got enough of a role behind him to get it.
Could it be that Bernie has been the one thing, and I understand the crass nature that Trump, the bombast, the narcissism. I mean, we all understand it, even those that support the president. We understand who he is. That's been baked into the cake. When MSNBC breaks news about Trump's indecent behavior, we kind of flippantly say, well, we expected that of him. I mean, we don't expect any different of that. But the one thing I think Trump can come across as, whether he is or not, is authentic. What comes in his brain comes out of his mouth, however unpleasant or unnecessary it may be. And I think people believe that Bernie means what he says. Authenticity is woefully lacking in a candidate today. And I think Sanders is being rewarded for the authentic nature that he conducts himself and says these things that I think are outlandish, but a certain subset of our electorate don't.
I think that's spot on, actually. I think that's a very good analysis. And I actually saw Trump in Manchester, New Hampshire as well, which was, to say something, he was a really interesting experience for a foreigner. I was wearing a tweed jacket and a tweed cap. I looked like an Englishman off the television,
Yeah, because it's a wrestling match. When it starts, it's like going to a Jim McMahon wrestling match.
Yeah. Anyway, it was astonishing performance. He flew Air Force One at about 300 feet down the main street, Manchester, New Hampshire, before he arrived. That was very popular with a waiting crowd. He roused everybody up. He was very fluent on stage. He speaks in simple language, but it's very fluent. And he's a sort of pantomime performer. I mean, he gets the boos, he gets the hisses when he wants them, then he gets the laughs, then he gets the cheers, and he gets the, he's a consummate performer. And I was impressed by him. I don't deny that, and I can see why he's got devoted fans. So I think if it's Bernie v. Trump, I wouldn't want to put too much money on Bernie. I really wouldn't. Now, if it's Bloomberg, we're into a different game.
So what do you make of the Bloomberg candidacy so far? It's obvious the guy has a lot of money. He failed miserably in his debate performance Wednesday night of last week, but he can make that right by continuing to spend enormous amounts of money. I argued that his consultant or handler should have been locked up for political malpractice for allowing him to go on the stage when the guy can write unlimited amounts of money and check. But what do you make of the Bloomberg candidacy?
Well, I completely agree with you with that. I was astonished that he was so unprepared. I've been writing in my small outlets that I write for that this is going to be the election in which where we really test the question, can you actually buy the American presidency? Because that is essentially, seems to me, what he's doing. I'm amazed everybody watched so much television in this country that these ads work. Because if you look at young people in Britain now, none of them watch television at all. They just watch their phones or they watch their laptops and they dodge the ads. But apparently the ads still work, and you can see Bloomberg going up in the polls on a quite steady basis now. Look, I think Bloomberg is absolutely what Bernie hates most in the world. Not what Trump hates most in the world, of course, but what Bernie hates most in the world. He is the oligarch's oligarch. On the other hand, unlike Trump, he wasn't given his money. I met somebody actually who remembers Bloomberg getting under his desk to plug in his computer for him. Bloomberg really did start in a modest way. He is now the 14th most wealthy man in the world. I think you've got to give him some credit for that.
Sure.
But he's also a nanny stater. I think he's longing to tell us all what to eat and drink and basically how to be better people. And I don't think Americans will like that on a large scale. And I think the question is simply, will money beat the Trump economy? Because I think the Trump economy is basically, as Clinton said, it's the economy stupid. And if the economy is still ticking over well by November, I think that's going to be the issue.
I got two final questions. One is the expertocracy. The James Carvilles of the world, the Karl Roves of the world, the guys who wrote the book, studied the book, know the model, can interpret the model, can define turnout and what states in play, what states not in play. Are those guys relevant today, or has the model so become confused that we don't know what the new normal is?
I think you're probably right. Polling gets more and more sophisticated, but it never seems to get exactly right. And I wouldn't trust the polls too much at this coming election. I think a lot of people are going to vote for Trump who have told their friends that they'd never do so. I think there are probably quite a lot of people who vote for Bloomberg who've told their friends that they'd never do so. I think it's a complex game. A lot of people get polled by people ringing their landlines. How many people are using landlines these days? All these small things can make a huge difference. So, I think it's going to be one of the most fascinating elections ever.
Last question. This country, our country, has been governed conservatively, more liberally, pragmatically. We were talking about Reagan during the break. I think Reagan would have been a pragmatic conservative. I think Clinton would have been a pragmatic Democrat. We've had the early days of Hamiltonians and Jeffersonians, and we could argue Jefferson won the battle. Hamilton probably won the war, because we do have a big central planning government. But there's no question that as we debate conservatism and liberalism and moderation, populism is an absolute powerful political force and is pervasive in politics all over the world today. It's not a coherent governing philosophy. I've never argued that it is. It is an absolute dangerous emotion when you let it become so overbearing to the political model. What is populism's role as it relates to how we govern England or America or Italy or Spain or any of these other countries? In other words, the populist craze that is pervasive today, what do the structures of government do with it?
Well, I think it's a check and balance on the arrogance of politicians. And in that respect, it's a good thing. But on the other hand, I think populism creates expectations which can seldom be met by politicians. And therefore it creates disappointment, and disappointment erodes democracy. So I think in a way, Putin is a populist leader. Nobody could say he has been democratically elected. But he maintains his power because of his populist support. And I think it is a danger. And I think all of us, you talked about experts and then you talked about pollsters, but I think there are other experts that we need to listen to. I think we need to listen to scientists. I think the populist dismissal of climate change, which is common, is a crazy, crazy thing. I think we've got to be grown up and realize when our scientists are all universally telling us something, we need to do something about it. So I think there are dangers with populism. And we saw what happened in Germany in the 30s. Never has there been a more popular government than that one. So be on our guard. And Americans, I think, are sophisticated and intelligent about the risks, not only of big government, but of mass movements that think they control the popular will.
I hate to be dishonest, but I am. I said that was the last question. I got one more because my mind's turning at 1,000,000 miles an hour. How important is it for the world, England is a part of that world, for America to not be as nationalistic as some people believe we're heading toward?
I think it's really important. I think the last 3.5 years have really made people realize what we got from the Pax Americana, from a grown-up, adult, responsible America ordering the world in which we live. I think we're very nervous now. We're not saying Trump is a bad man, but he's volatile, and we're worried about whether he'll take the right decisions at critical moments. And I think one of the things the world has always depended on, and I think every president really since the Second World War has delivered a degree of confidence to the rest of the world, that America is sort of on the side of sensible world management. I worry with this president whether he has managed to convey that view as much as we would like.
And it's pretty obvious with Bernie Sanders, the likely nominee on the other side, the American electorate are perfectly comfortable with a more inward-looking American foreign policy.
That may be right. When I worked here in Washington, I used to say, I've come to work in the world's biggest island. I seem to remember that in the late 90s, only something like a third of members of the House of Representatives actually had passports. I think America perhaps is more familiar with the rest of the world now. But I think there is a danger in American introversion. You should all get out and travel more, because the world is an interesting place outside America, and you will learn more about the goodness of America if you go and see the other places. Not that they're bad, but that they are different. And the unique nature of this wonderful country of yours is illustrated in a way by contrast to others.
Ivo, appreciate your time very much. Very well said. Thank you very much. We'll take a break. We'll be back in just a minute.